Hi, my name's Ashley Mackenzie. I'm on the IN2G SHOW and we're discussing that famous saying, I catch flights, not feelings. I didn't actually look for the quotes. The quote found me.
That's what I like to hear.
And I was with a group of young people yesterday, and in the midst of the discussion, this guy, he stood up and he said, you know, I catch flights, not feelings.
Oh.
And it did make me stop because I've heard the quote
Before.
flying around before, and people use it quite loosely and don't think about what they're actually saying. And I wanted to try and find the origin of the quote, and I couldn't find the original source of the quote, but I was trying to understand the various interpretations of what it means. And essentially, it is this train of thought whereby instead of investing time and effort into building emotional stability in the sense of a relationship, in the sense of, and that can be a family relationship or friendship,
right.
or a kind of romantic relationship, I am going to park that all to one side and just spend my money on enjoyment and entertainment at that point in time.
Oh dear.
And for a lot of us as young people, it might make sense in that moment.
Yeah.
But what are the consequences later on down the line? And how does that impact upon our relationships and our sexual relationships also further on down the line? And that was my quote of my thinking process.
Eugenie, let's hear you.
So, and this is a problem. It's kind of linked to what I was going to talk about. But what we need to understand is that we need to be in touch with our feelings, right? Mm-hmm. From a child. And in that, from a child, because we're taught how to feel from our parents, right? Oh, did little Johnny hurt your feelings? And that's complete nonsense. Johnny can't hurt your feelings. You're controlling, like you said, you're in control of your feelings. So we need to learn how to, what our feelings feel like, right? And we need to learn how to change our feelings, because you can talk about, well, I'm just going to do this and do that and whatever, but each one of those things, there's an emotion connected to that. So you can't actually do one thing without, your feelings are always there. You can't do one thing without some sort of emotion, and there's a whole range of emotions. So to me, it's complete nonsense, right? And it's also sad, because you're gonna try and just not feel anything, and you're gonna find yourself in a place where maybe you're lonely, maybe you're wondering, well, what went wrong? Why can't I maintain a relationship? And it's all because, I mean, look, we have to have that emotional intelligence. If we don't have that, then, you know, we're just shooting blank.
So, you know, I like to fire questions away, and I tried to dig a bit deeper with the individuals in the group, and, you know, people were not as open to it. But one thing that did come out is a lot of the time, we don't start off from this point. And, you know, we don't just adopt this attitude from the beginning. For most people, although they present that front, it is a trauma response. Something has happened previously that has now caused me to shut down. And because I haven't had the safe spaces, I don't have those individuals that I can speak to, I've internalized these emotions. And I'm saying, I am not letting anybody have this impact. I'm not going to be hurt like this again. So I'm going to close off from everyone, have the enjoyment for this short period of time. And at that point in life where I'm thinking, I am a bit lonely, I am ready to open up again.
No one's around.
No one's around. I don't feel as good in myself as I may have done before. The people in my age group may all be partnered up, and I'm not. And then now there's a comparison, and it opens up a whole can of worms.
Because it comes about, what would happen is that jealousy would then come into play. It will come about where, and I was thinking about, you know, trauma is probably a trauma response, but I think that what happens with these sort of things is that it's a way of protecting themselves. Like it's trying to protect yourself. Say, I don't want to get hurt, and I don't, like you said, I don't want to get hurt, and I'm not going to let nobody in. But it's becoming such a common thing with the youth and people saying, I'm not going to get hurt. But as a community of Christians, do we have an answer for that? Because we do talk a lot about, actually I'm going to put this to you, we do talk a lot about forgiveness.
Yes.
Right? And the first thing that came into my mind was maybe forgiveness is a tool. But I don't think that the way that we as a community, as Christians, talk about forgiveness is either realistic or practical, or how would you then support somebody that has those feelings? How do they get over that trauma? How do they go about fixing those things? Because it's, like you said, it's come about because they've gone through something.
That's a big one.
Wow. I heard you take a deep breath. I was like, well, do you want to take that? No. I think one of the biggest challenges that we have is having those conversations in the first place. And you find that a lot of people haven't processed what has taken place. And if you have individuals around you that only know snippets of the story, or they just know elements of what happened in the aftermath, they will pump some toxic, they will just be fueling all of those negative emotions, and you never have a chance to really unpack and process what has happened. Because especially in a relationship setting, there's always multiple elements, there's always two sides to the story. And I always believe, and I always say to people that there's no experience that you go through in vain. And every experience you go through, there's things that you have to learn from it. But the only way you can learn from that experience is to actually reflect upon what has happened. Let's let the emotions settle. I'm not saying do it straight away, but let's unpack it, let's process what's happened, and then forgiveness becomes a lot easier. And the way we teach forgiveness sometimes is like just this blind forgiveness, you know? No matter how I feel, no matter what, no matter how hurt I am, even though I've never had a discussion about it, even though I'm carrying this baggage and this trauma, I'm just gonna forgive you and move on with my life. And it doesn't work like that, because I've said I've forgiven you, but when I see your picture come up on my feed, there's fire burning in my heart. Where I've blocked all of your numbers, and now you've emailed me, and I'm throwing my phone at the wall because I've said the words that I've forgiven you, but I haven't actually forgiven you. And even when people are in the wrong, and something I have learned over life is there are people that have done some awful things and they are in the wrong. And sometimes you almost feel like in forgiving them, I am justifying or condoning their behavior.
I feel like saying something to
I mean, well, go for it. No, go for it.
Listen, I want to hear you.
It's a very short comment.
Yeah.
I hear what you're saying, and I think some of the things you're saying kind of echo what you were talking about. And I don't think forgiveness is the same as not having boundaries.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Because there's a reason why you say forgive and forget, right? But then if true forgiveness is not like when you're going to look at them and be like so that's not forgiveness then, right? Because forgiveness is not about them, it's about you. It's about freeing ourselves from that pain, right? And I mean, how I did it one time was I just got a list of all the people throughout my whole life that I could think of that I need to forgive, and I went into each person and I kind of analysed it, because sometimes we think that people are just plain evil, and sometimes they're not, right? And so it's like, okay, so what was my responsibility in this situation? Did they really do that in terms of, were they really that malicious? Could it have been this? Could it have been that? And worked it out, and then eventually you kind of like, actually, yeah, I mean, I could have done this. I could have said this, but I didn't. And then eventually all of that bitterness just kind of dissipates, because it's like, yeah, okay, I was responsible for some of that as well. And so it becomes easier to forgive them. You can't forgive somebody if you still think, So I think that, hold your horses, I think that it is about the process of forgiveness,
Yeah.
which is really, really important. And then it does it does eventually free you, and you have to ask God to help you with it as well. So that way you can actually forgive and move on and forget.
But I think Eugenia, I think you said something really important. I think about taking responsibility and accountability, because those are things that when we're going through stuff like that, we don't want to take responsibility, because you create, we create a story basically where the hero of the story and that person's the villain, and that's some of the things that we do, and it's human nature. But like you said, having that list and saying, what was my part in that whole story? If it was a film that was put on Netflix, what was my part? What is my character in that story? Would I even perceive myself as somebody who was the sort of innocent person? Or is it something that actually people be like, look at me sideways like, I don't think so, do you know what I mean? So it's about that kind of, taking that sort of view allows you. And also another thing that I'm gonna add is, forgiveness for me is different from restoration, and it feeds onto your bad. And I was going to speak to you about that. Vanessa, talk to me about that.
No, I just wanted to say, especially from the point of view of abuse, right? We have to always have the disclaimer, because sometimes you are fully innocent, especially if you were a child. And we always need to say, look, forgiveness is not the same as you being friend with that person. And sometimes the safest, healthiest, best thing you can do is forgive that person and keep them away from your life.
100%.
That's all I wanted to say.
100%, and I get that, and that's what I mean by restoration. Touching, because restoring somebody into your sort of, I say your orbit. You're like your own planet, and you've got an orbit. How does that affect you? Is it something that's healthy for you? If it's abuse, you don't want that person to be around you. Or if you're a parent to that child, you don't want that person around you. Sorry, you're gonna say, Asha.
The only thing that I think, echoing most of what's been said, but I think it's important to separate the two, because especially from a lot of the young people I speak to, the way they view removing someone from their orbit is to not even address or think about what has taken place. And you can remove someone from your orbit and create and put healthy boundaries in place between you and that person, but you still need to address what has that trauma that has occurred, because those things will manifest later in life and in other ways. And that's the only thing I wanted to add to what you're saying, because I've had the conversation, the same conversations with people, and their interpretation is, my way of cutting this person out is to just block out every possible thing that's happened, and then pretend that I had never encountered this person, the trauma never took place, and I'm going to be fine now, and that's how I'm going to heal, and that's how I'm going to forgive, and that's not actually accurate.
And also, forgiveness is not always taken over. It doesn't happen overnight. It can take sometimes years. That's another thing that I add to your. And I think acknowledgement of this is what's happened and working through that process. And it could be that you need to go counselling as well. That's something that people don't always think that, I've got to go to counselling to get to that place within our community. But you may need to go to counselling. You may need to go to a professional, and you may need to go to, it might be that you may never talk to that person again in that way. But you need to go and find that safe place, that place that you can, like you said, get it out, examine it. If there's a place where you should be taking responsibility, like you said, take responsibility and just grow from it. There's lessons to be learned in all situations.